Hello, everyone. I'm Talaya Dendy. For anyone that's new to navigating cancer together, I am your host. This is a show that has something for everyone facing cancer. Why? Because everyone is different with different needs, beliefs, and perspectives. Thank you for joining us for this episode. I encourage you to open your minds and your hearts. Today, our very special guest is Denise Miceli. Denise is the founder of Rock Your Blocks, which empowers midlife women to align their life's work with inner desires through growth and personal transformation. She offers intuitive coaching using positive intelligence to enhance performance, relationships, and well being. Denise's foundational coaching training spans 3 to 6 months, fostering profound, lasting change. With 25 years of experience, Denise holds mental health and leadership degrees and certifications in MAP, Make Anything Possible, and intuitive alignment, blending neuroscience and positive intelligence for transformative self reflection and swift life changes. Denise, such great work. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Denise. Great to have you. Before we really dive into the conversation, Denise, I'd like to know, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. I had a super busy day, more than I expected, actually, the whole week, but it was so good. So, sometimes you just have those weeks and then you can sort of glide through the next one. So, yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to the weekend, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, busy's good. That's good. I'm glad you're
Yes,
doing good and it's a
thank
good
you.
busy.
It is.
Speaking of busy, Denise, please tell us, more about your background, your education and certifications, and how they serve as foundations for your expertise.
So, yeah, my career was in education, and I very quickly realized because I have this love for learning, and part of learning is teaching, part of learning is sharing your knowledge. And for me, they went hand in hand. So, very early on, I was a classroom teacher, but within a year or two, I found that I was being called on to share what I knew, to share different strategies and methods that were always trying to engage more with the students, always trying to engage more with who they were and what worked for them, because we know not all kids learn the same, just like not all adults do. So I very quickly became a leader and realized my passion for learning involved more than just me reading books and taking in content, but also really just a love of sharing that. And so that was very much about helping people change to be better for those that they were teaching. And I, started with the kids, and then I went very quickly on to helping teachers to be more effective so they could connect with students that are special, students that just need to move when they're learning, all the different styles. And over time, got certified as a leader and really became known for helping people get to the root of the problem quickly and figure out what they needed to do in order to be more effective and to, feel that they're making a difference. So that foundation, eventually, I realized that I really enjoyed helping adults to to find what was not aligned with them, because even many times as I would coach my staff and that, I would find that people were really, sometimes they got into their career because their parents were in that career, or their parents thought it was a noble profession or whatever, and maybe it was not a good fit. I can remember so many times having people that were trying so hard, but they just weren't getting it. They just weren't seeing maybe the students. I had a couple situations where they said to me, "Do you think that I should be doing this?" And you
Mm,
could tell it takes people sometimes a long time to question, because we don't realize that those beliefs or expectations of us came from so long ago. They become neural pathways, they become really cemented in our brain. And even to think of, am I really good at this? Or is there something else I could do? Strikes a lot of fear. And so that's how I kind of came to the conclusion that I really wanted to work with adults who were, had so much that they could do in life, but they were kind of feeling stuck back on what they had been told they should do, or even something they selected, but it just no longer resonated with them. And I find, oh my, there's a lot of people in this situation,
Mhm.
especially women, over 40. But I mean, I even see it in some that are in their 30s that they go, oh, I'm a doctor now, and they hate it, like what it took them to get there and all of that stuff. But they did it for a different reason. They did it for the salary, or they did it because their dad was. And so there's so much in us that has to see that we can approach that. We don't have to go, well, I'm just going to walk out the door, but to begin to do this kind of work, at least acknowledge with self-compassion that it's okay to change your mind. Part of, I think, why people struggle so much is that every time we think I have to change something, we think, oh, I'm a failure.
Mhm.
And really, failure is a part of learning. And when you fail, even like as a teacher, you deliver a lesson, nobody gets it. What do? Just, oh, I'm going to quit. Or you say, you know what? I think I was talking too much about that
Mhm.
lesson. Or maybe I didn't give them a reason to care, like a purpose for the lesson. And so you have to be able to reflect on yourself and say, hey, what happened here and what am I going to do? So I decided to leave that career after 20 years. And my experience with doing that was really difficult, but I had to go inward. I had to trust myself. And I had to look at all of the credentials that I had and say, you know what? I really have what it takes to help people change. It's just changing it, transmuting it into something else now. And so since then, I've gotten the certification in MAP, which is a subconscious healing where you go back in time and you say, what happened as a child where maybe I just became a pleaser? Maybe I felt that if I didn't do what my parents expected of me in becoming this whatever, then I was going to disappoint them and I couldn't, do that. Or, just whatever it was. Maybe you didn't feel seen for like your artistic talent, so you buried it. And so those things, it's not about blame or anything. Like we all know our parents, even me as a parent, I'm doing the best I can, but I don't feel perfect.
Mhm.
It's just about saying, you know what, that's why that happened. And it may have been childhood or adolescence, or even in the 20s, maybe something happened, but it's okay that that experience happened, but we don't have to keep living that way and feeling out of whack. When people just have persistent negative emotions, whether it's depression or anxiety, it's usually a sign that you really want to be doing something else, or you want to be in a different relationship, or you want to be in maybe living somewhere else. Some people who are just retired, they just get very out of whack because they're like, you know what, maybe I wasn't ready to retire, or maybe I need to find a cause and go work for a nonprofit or something like that. So it can take many different forms. And so positive intelligence is the one that I most recently found and was recommended by another coach to me. It really takes all of the work, and it helps people to see that it's not that difficult to make the changes, but it is a commitment of changing your mindset. It's a commitment of learning little on the go things that you can do to keep yourself in touch with yourself and to be more present in the moment, because look at all the stuff that's going on, right? I mean, we're just bombarded with information and our email boxes are running over, and, videos and all these updates. It can be so overwhelming that if we don't have our own inner practice, and it doesn't have to be like a big, long meditative practice, it can be these small things. So this positive intelligence has really distilled down into little 1 minute things that you could do to keep yourself calm. Like as soon as you feel that negative emotion coming, okay, let me just take a little walk over here, stretch, breathe. There's just a number of things you could do to bring yourself back to your inner wisdom. We all have it, but sometimes those negative emotions really run right over it. And, usually if you don't feel good, if you're hunched over, you've kind of lost that, you've lost that positivity, and you're going to get so much more done if you can bring yourself back. So that's
Mhm.
really how I came to bring all of that, all of those different things together. But really, the bottom line being wanting to share, wanting to grow myself and having a passion for that, and then wanting to share that with others.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And I really love that you started with education. I think that's so key. Our education system just needs, so many more teachers who really value that work and doing that work. So thank you for doing that for over 25 years. While you were explaining things, Denise, I heard you mention people pleasing. And how ingrained is that in some of us, people pleasing? I want to ask this question because it really impacts a lot of people, especially women. And how ingrained is it in a lot of women? And how hard is it to change?
So I think there's a lot of sense about it. It's very ingrained, and a lot of it is because we saw our mothers doing it. We might have even seen our grandmothers doing it. So it's generational. It is literally in our DNA to be the service oriented cleaner, chief bottle washer, cook, everything to everyone. And, in a sense, what we learn is that if we're not that, there's something wrong with us. Right.
Mhm.
And so for me, I was looking at all of that and I was thinking, I want something different for myself. Not that I didn't necessarily, I mean, at the time when I was a teen, I said, oh, I don't want to be a mom and a wife. I'm not going to get married and have children. Like, because I was like looking at all these other things I could be. And that was so exciting to me. And I guess I thought you couldn't have both because in my family, the women had the traditional and they didn't have the other. And there were very few women that had jobs. And if they did, they were very simple and they were still coming home and doing all that stuff, right? How many women do you know your family
Mhm.
going back? They
Yeah.
did both.
Yeah.
And they were very quiet about it. They didn't make a big fuss. They just did all of it.
That's right.
And the men, they just did their job, came home and they were waiting for supper, right?
Mhm.
So when you look at that, it is very deeply entrenched. Now, that doesn't mean, and I think sometimes the media, the way it portrays it, I've even seen somebody that said, long time people pleaser. The thing
Mm.
is, we are not people pleasers. It's a behavior.
Mm.
We learned it. And so I don't like it. It's like that labeling with kids. I didn't even want to hear what the prior teacher said about a kid because I would get the kid and I'd be like, I don't see that. Right. So it's all how we look at that student. It's the same with each other. And I think that there's a perception out there that we are pleasers and that's all we're ever going to be. But I think that women tend to look at it as I have to have a confrontation to not please. Now,
Right.
you can look at it that way, but it makes it seem insurmountable. It makes it seem like I've just got to keep doing it. Maybe I'll just, kind of like not even see these people because I don't feel comfortable asking for what I need. But here's the downside of that. When we do that, or we just continue to quietly do for others, they don't really know who we are because we have hidden our true needs. And so there's a side effect that's not so great in the fact that they don't know who we are. So if we just suddenly one day say, no, I'm not doing that for you without it, not nasty or anything, but just no, they would turn around and go, who just said no? Because they
Mhm.
don't know us to be discerning. They don't know us to be taking care of ourselves. And the long-term effects are that we resent those very people that we love. So two things, we resent them and they don't know who we really are because we're wishy-washy. We go with the flow of everybody else. And then we become resentful. And as decades go on, as people get older, they're just resentful and they just keep doing. And that is one way to go. But when I work with someone in midlife that, when you take the positive intelligence assessment, the pleaser is one of our top saboteurs. I tell you what, I haven't seen one that has been under an 8. Okay. And
Really?
some people come up at 10. We don't necessarily have it in every area of our life. So, for example, for a long time, my career was number one in that I was going to school, I was working, and I was a mom, but I put so much of my life force into that. Now, after school, there was my daughter in there. I would take the time that I needed to be with her. And of course, if she needed me during a school day, I was there. But the point being that I had all of those things that I was focused on. I felt very much in charge, right? And I was becoming a leader. But in my relationships, I was just going with the flow. It was almost like because I was being more assertive and more outgoing in those other roles, I kind of like took my pleaser and put it over here. And so that can happen too. And a lot of times that's where women kind of stick with the pleaser, is in the personal relationships. But then you find they're not very satisfying. And like I said, there's two reasons for that. One is you're resentful because this person keeps asking you, but guess what? You taught them that it's okay.
Yeah.
And so they don't know that you're trying to study at night. They don't know that you're doing all these other things and you don't really have time to take them somewhere on Saturday. And so those two things end up to conspire really against you. And the mythology around thinking that it is so hard to do and it has to be done in a confrontation. It's actually the opposite. And I tell people this: the way to start is simple, and you don't want to defend yourself. You're an adult, right? And so when we think about people that are doing people pleasing, they are not truly ever saying they need something. So, for example, if someone keeps asking you the same thing and they want your time over and over and over again, maybe it's a little easier to say, I'm not sure about that. Let me go home and check with everyone and check my schedule, whatever it is. Just don't give them an immediate answer. That's a
Mhm.
start. So you don't have to just one day wake up and your power pleaser is gone, but you can start to do little things. Delay it. But don't, when you go to say, oh, you call them up and say, you know what, I looked, can't do that. You don't have to give a reason. The problem is when we have been giving so long with the same person. So just picture one person, and then we start telling them no because this and this. They're just going to go after each one of those things and tell you, oh, you could just do that later. Or, they're going to start micromanaging. But the fact is that you kind of taught them to behave that way. So you have to be willing. You can't just expect to say no once and have them not stomp their feet a little, right? We know
Mhm.
adults who do that. They give you that look or they give you that comment. We have to be okay with it and just say, if you want to say, because you care about the person, I've realized how much I don't ask for what I need, and I need to say no to you here. And I will hope that you'll respect it. And when I can do something and I truly can, then I'm going to say yes. And just keep it simple, because it isn't going to take just one time, especially like, for example, with parents. No matter how old your children are, the older you are, the longer you've been doing pleasing with them, right? And we don't help our children when we try to make things easier for them. We've got to realize that we're kind of standing in the way of their growth in a way. So it is a huge, huge problem, especially for women, and it doesn't get easier over the decades. So it
Okay.
is something that comes up, and we actually do like meditations for it and affirmations for it, and know that it's not simple, but it is doable. You just have to show up for yourself. And that's why having like a strategy where you check in throughout the day, you just take those couple of minutes and you go, okay, think about it. Give yourself a chance to think about your true answer. And the more you do that, the easier that it gets. And if there are truly toxic people who are just takers, they will fall away from your life. And you know what? It can be a good thing,
Mhm.
because many times, what do we attract if we're big time pleasers? We attract people who are looking for that. The word narcissist comes up, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, that kind of behavior does attract people like that, because they're like, oh, wow, look at how great she is with this and this and this and this. That happened to me for a very long time before I realized, okay, I feel pretty darn resentful. Like at first, you're
Mhm.
like, oh, wow, they value me. But there's that young part of you that wanted that unconditional love and recognition that's still inside of you. And so part of
Mhm.
this work, we actually go back and we honor that child that
Yeah.
deserved all of that, that maybe just didn't have, the parents were so busy with their own lives and they didn't see that they were causing that child to feel somehow like if they didn't do enough, they would be considered unworthy. They didn't know. That's why I tell people it doesn't have to be necessarily a trauma from childhood. It's maybe just the way you felt. Maybe
Yeah.
you just felt different. And You felt like you were looked at differently. That's all it really takes for you to kind of develop this sense of unworthiness.
Mm. Thank you for explaining that.
Sure.
Denise, you mentioned that you are a mother,
Mhm.
and you also shared with me in the previous conversation that you are a caregiver for your adult daughter. Please share your experience as a caregiver and some lessons that you've learned.
Yeah, this really ties into the pleaser because, we went through a lot during just before the pandemic, actually. But there was a lot of time there where I felt like the mama bear woke up
Mm,
and I had to protect her because there were some things that happened. And I just, I really did. I kind of like, took her in and we got a little bit over attached with the pandemic. I mean, I think a lot of people went through various things with their relationships, but particularly when you're a caregiver, what I've learned is the biggest lesson is that really checking in and asking. And I did learn this through teaching as well, that don't assume. Just don't assume that it's like, "Oh, I should just do this myself." Ask them to do it, ask them to do it and let them come to you and say, "I can do up to this point, but I can't like bend over and lift something this way." Because if we just automatically do it, that pleasing thing kicks in, and then that person doesn't even really, maybe they don't even really know if they can do it, but they're like, "Hey, she's willing to do it and I can do these other things." It's really very much about checking in with the self, and where you want to give advice as a caregiver,
mm,
as a mom even, how could we turn that around into a question? That was one of the most powerful things I learned actually from being a teacher, was that telling students how to do it, they were not learning. And so I eventually I started in 3rd grade and I went up to 5th. And eventually I started to realize that there's 20 different ways to approach a math problem, right?
mhm,
So I would
yeah,
have them come in and I would pick on all different levels of kids to go up and do problem number that, and they never knew which one I was going to pick. And then I would, let everybody, let's all look at these together and let's talk through it and let's see if we get it and let's see if it's correct. And it was like to sit back like that as a teacher, you're like, like at first it was like, oh, I should be taking charge of the situation, right? But really, what happened is they developed their leadership. This one little boy said to me, I really understand it way better when Eric does it than
oh,
when you do it. It's like, okay,
okay,
and again, as the adult in the room, we have to check our egos at the door
yes,
because they do have other ways. And there were some brilliant kids in that class. I mean, I remember one year at 5th grade, I had kids at everything from pre-K level in math and reading to grade 12. I had one that I tried to promote early because he was so brilliant. He was ready for algebra. So when we just stand up there, sage on the stage, and like, here's the answers, okay, we lose about half
mm,
because they were stuck on the first part of the problem, some simple thing they got stuck on and they just checked out. And so I think that when we turn it around and we give them the responsibility and then let them ask for the part that is a struggle. So that's really what I've learned too as a caregiver. It doesn't really matter what age they are if you're just constantly taking care of things. So coming out of the pandemic, it was like, okay, now we're at this point. And at one point, my daughter lost her job and I was taking care of things, but now she's in college and she has a part-time job. When we moved into our last place, it was like, okay, let's split up some of these bills.
nice, yeah,
And if you have a hard time, I'm here, but there's a certain amount of responsibility at this age that you need to have, because otherwise, why would she ever want to leave?
right,
Right?
that's right,
And nobody should have like a completely free ride. So we've come a long way to where she feels comfortable asking me if something is, delayed or something like that. And I'm blessed to be able to offer that assistance and to
yeah,
be the sort of the umbrella, because I know the difficulties that she has. So it's again that self-awareness. So being self-aware of like the way that I was doing it, or the way that once I became a principal and all of that, and I would go observe people. And I remember, because after I would observe them, of course, I'm taking notes, so they're so intimidated. And I had
mhm,
everything from beginners to like sage teachers that I was like sometimes delighted and sometimes oh my gosh, I don't know where to start, right? And I learned after my first year doing that, you cannot just bring them in and say, this was wrong, this was wrong, this was, they check
Mm,
out after the
that's
first
right.
thing.
Yeah.
So I would say to them, and I would send them a message and say, thank you for showing me this lesson today. What do you think went well? What would you change
Mm,
if you could? Oh my goodness. Now they were excited. Like some of them would
mhm.
sit there at night and write this whole email about it. I go, oh, you didn't have to do that. You could just come in and talk to me. No, but I loved how you asked that because it really made me think. So it's really developed into an approach of like personal responsibility for the person that is going through it. And that's been my pleaser journey. That's been so powerful. And it allows you to listen and see the
Mhm.
other person and hear the other person. So many times, when you're talking in a conversation, you can notice that sometimes people are not listening to you
Yes.
because they're thinking of
Mhm.
what they're
And
going
I
to
say,
say next.
mhm.
And it takes you away. So there's so many ways we interact that are just not super healthy, and then add the technology and the phones and the screens, and we have a lot of people walking around with just ADD brains at this
Yeah.
point. So unless it's a conscious effort, people are very challenged to connect with each other and to support each other in ways that are healthy. So coaching to me is exploding the way that therapy did back in the 80s. Before the 80s, nobody even talked about therapy. It was either you were like psychiatry or nothing. And then all of a sudden everyone had a therapist and there was
Mhm.
marital therapy. So I feel like we've kind of aged out of that a bit. People still go, but now people are looking for someone that really wants to help them get to the root of the issue. You see coaches in every specialty, right? Relationship coaches, career coaches, all of that. I'm passionate about really helping women because I saw in my lifetime being like my one foot in that older generation and seeing the limitations that we
Mhm.
place on ourselves from the old limiting beliefs on women.
Yeah, wonderful. Now let's transition to talking a little bit more about cancer. Your grandmother was diagnosed with cancer when you were really young. Please share with us what you saw and experienced through the eyes of a young child. And I'm really curious, Denise, did anyone even talk about what was going on?
No, it was very much kept like some kind of bad secret, and it was not verbalized. I mean, it was more or less seeing the pain, seeing, my grandma, who was always so the center of, all the cooking and the entertaining and always the happiest. She always loved to play Italian music and sing and dance. And, everyone used to go to her house every Sunday, and we had just this huge party every Sunday. So when this happened, there was a lot of whispers about it. I think that we were just considered too young to even like try to explain anything to us. And then there was a lot of anger that came about because being of that, I guess they call it the silent generation of people that it wasn't okay to talk about things like that. When things like that happened, it was like you were just supposed to kind of sweep it under the rug. What I did know, and I always was very intuitive, even as a child, I realize it now, but I could feel the energy that
Hmm.
there was a lot of resentment from my grandfather towards my grandmother because she couldn't do everything.
Yeah.
And it was like, where is the love to think about her suffering like that? And I knew that she was because you could tell from looking at her, and she was losing her hair, and she was having chemo, and she had a double mastectomy. These were the times where there weren't like all the treatments that we have now. She was dealing with a lot of anger and hostility and sort of rage against her, like she chose it. Of course she
Right.
didn't choose it. That was very uncomfortable and very hard to watch. I didn't fully understand it, of course, at the time, but as I got older, my mom would talk about it because my grandmother suffered for 10 years after she had all of the treatments and the radiation and the double mastectomy. She ended up getting the cancer in her bones, and
Oh,
so that is a really hard road because there wasn't a lot of treatment. It was just a lot of suffering. She had it almost 10 years before she passed, and she passed at like a very young age, like 55, something like that. So that was my first encounter with it. And then my mom sort of fearing getting breast cancer from that has sort of instilled a fear in me. I started having mammograms at 30 and I knew it was
Mm,
like young, but now it's like, oh my gosh, I've had so many mammograms. I don't have that fear anymore, but I also know we can now talk about these things. We
mhm,
now have so many great support networks and people that are dealing even with chronic pain. There's a lot of people in my field that help people deal and manage with chronic pain that from other things, not just cancer. It's amazing, really, that we've grown so much. And I feel like what I hope for women that have it now is that they get connected with these communities like yours and they understand that there is another way to approach getting care and, feeling accepted no matter where you are in the journey
mhm.
and, and getting the help and support that you need and not feeling like you have to hide it, not feeling
Yeah.
like you have to suffer in silence.
Mm. Thank you for sharing your very personal story, Denise. How do you think seeing that at a very young age, how do you think that impacted you and the work that you're doing today, if at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it made me very sensitive to sort of like emotional undercurrents, I want to say. I think of myself now as sort of empathic in that even when I work with clients, like before I start my work or even before an interview, I take a few minutes to kind of just release all of the previous thing that I was doing because I want to be fully present for this next experience. And I realized that after the pandemic and getting with my daughter that way, that I probably have always had that sensitivity. And that is why I felt different because I could kind of read what was going on. And I knew that something wasn't right. So later in life, that was when I was, under 10 when my grandma passed. But later, as things got tough in my family, I could literally walk in the door and just feel the energy and be like, okay, I got to check on everybody, So I became somewhat of a rescuer
Mhm,
because my awareness was so fine tuned. And I knew these people so well and loved them, of course, but I would literally go check on my mom, my dad, my younger brother and sister, like just make sure everybody's okay. And typically I found that at least one or two or more of them were not. And then I
mhm,
would, talk to them and try to help them and not realizing at the time that I was taking that role on. And so then I was not able to do the things that I wanted to do because I would give so much to that situation. Then I would come back to my space and like, okay, got to do my homework. Okay, now I'm tired. I got to go to bed, And so
mhm.
I learned that very young that that was very valued. And as I got into my teen years, it was like they were coming to me now. I didn't even
Yeah.
have to come in and check on everyone. They were coming to me. So I think it did make me someone, obviously, you know, the the family, there was always a lot of love. There were just key people who had that like resentment. If I don't get the love I need, I'm going to be a bear.
Oh,
There was
yes.
that, that
Mhm.
would creep in. But overall, I think just the heart and the love and how much everyone really just had fun together and all of that. And wanting people to be able to find that, even if you're going through a transitional period of your life, you get a diagnosis or you get a new boss, and it's like, okay, if this doesn't work for me anymore, that's okay. Like, I want to be that support. And I want women to know that you can get through whatever difficulty that it is with the right kind of support, with support that's going to, be there to listen to you, but also to help you see what is really inside your heart and what you truly do have the wisdom to pull out of yourself, to stop all those voices of
Mm,
you're not enough or this happened for this reason. A lot of times we blame ourselves when we get sick or we have, something like that happen, and we look at our family and it's like we want someone to blame. There's a
yeah.
lot of that going around in the world right now.
Yeah.
It's like if you take that away, what is it that you can learn from this experience? And what is it that you can do to find some different answers?
Mhm.
Because maybe the ones right in front of you just don't feel, appropriate right now.
Yeah, understandable. Denise, what makes you uniquely qualified to, helping people create change in their work, their life, their well-being? Why do you specifically work with midlife women? Why is that so important to you?
I think for me, I feel like a lot of why I feel really qualified is because I really learned from the young ones. I learned from the kids that no matter what your challenge is, no matter what that last person said about you, you have value.
Yes.
And even though you might be different, you might need to move around while you're learning. So guess what? I'm going to give you this whole space over here so you can move around. And I'm going to learn not to let that bother me because that's what you need
Yes.
to learn. And so when you do it at that level and you see it in, kids that really they haven't even learned to have all the meanness about them that we get in the
Mm,
world. And you're like, you know what, this is really what it's about. It's about really looking at a person and that knowing that every person, no matter how misguided they might be at the moment, has that child inside of them that just wanted to be loved, that had all these special qualities, that is still a part of you. And
mhm.
having gone through that journey a couple of times myself, I feel like that more than the credentials and the studies and all of that really qualifies me because I think that people want to know that you've been down that path. They
Mhm.
want to know that you faced it. I mean, having a job with a very high salary, being good at it, having all those years in, there were so many reasons not to leave,
Yes.
except feeling sad all the time. And I'm not a sad person. And it just was really crushing. And
Mm,
I thought, what will I become if I just ignore this sadness or medicate this sadness? So when I tell that story of how this career became something that it really did change over time, because being
mhm.
in education at the time that I was, it went from focusing on the kids and helping the teachers to active shooter drills and keeping shooters out, or keeping kids safe if shooters were in, and bullying. And it was like that's what my life became about. I was trained by the principal of Columbine, going back when the
Oh,
first
wow.
big events happened. So when you start to hear those stories and then you start to plan for it, and you have 800 souls that you are responsible for, but you're not really involved anymore in the fun stuff, in the
Mm,
teaching and the laughter and the life lessons that you get working with kids and their families. I could have easily just pushed on, and many people do because they're like, "Oh, I have to
mhm.
get to 30 years." And I thought that I would because like I said, I was having great success and moving up, but I realized that the price of that
Mhm.
was just really too high. And I
Mm,
felt like something calling me. And I think a lot of women in midlife, they go through what we call a crisis. But
mhm.
I say maybe that crisis is a sign of an opportunity for growth. I love to phrase it that way because it's like, oh, you know what? It's okay to dream big and to think of something more. I've had clients who've heard my story and they've worked with me for a couple months, and they'll contact me and say, I left that job and,
Mhm.
had some terrible like accounting job that they just grew to hate, things we grow out of it, and wanted to so work for a nonprofit. She ended up becoming like a director at a nonprofit organization. So to be able to inspire is important to me. I like
Mm,
inspiring people to realize that you can handle change. And yes, it might not be comfortable the whole time, but when we
yes.
even go 10% out of that comfort zone, we create things in our lives that we never thought were possible. And that's
Yeah.
where having a coach that understands, I feel like, is really what midlife women need. And when I talk about the gift or the opportunity, they're like, they're like they want to show up
They
because
perk
they
up.
know there's another way to look at any adversity that happens. And
Yes.
if you're mega stressed out, you're not going to be able to see it. So
Mm-mm.
first thing is we got to get you to calm, and we got to get your nervous system out of that fight or flight mode
Mhm.
so that you can begin to connect with that wisdom, because the wisdom is underneath it all. It's always there,
So true.
and so we do that kind of connecting to the self and clearing some of the intensity of the emotions just through simple things. And that allows them to kind of dream a little bit. And they'll come back and they'll be like, oh, I had this dream that I was going to paint, and amazing things sometimes that they maybe tried earlier in life. sometimes
Mhm.
something completely new they've always wanted to try. So I think it's really a lot about inspiration and just wanting to take that giving pleaser, that over giver,
Yes.
and really bring it full circle and be like, you know what, I can help and support without over giving and let women see they can too, you know?
Mhm. That's right. Yeah, it's possible. What
Absolutely.
part does intuition play in healing?
Oh, that's a good one. So I think all of us have intuition, but it's whether we listen to it. I think that we all, men, women, all of us, children, that we kind of get like when we have a question, we kind of get the answer right away and we'll overly question it. Oh, well, that came right away. It must not be the answer,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Or that came right away and it felt really good. But then the critic comes in and the judge comes in. It's like, oh, that's never going to
Yeah.
work. And so we bury it. So I do believe that intuition is again that thing that is going to come back and it's going to feel more empowered when we clear away some of that hyperachiever energy, that like forcing yourself, driving yourself. I mean, I know women in their 60s and that and they've been super active and they're trying to keep up the level of activity from 30 years ago.
Yeah.
No
Mhm.
matter how great you eat and sleep, you're not meant to do what you did 30 years ago. Now, I'm a big advocate for staying fit and healthy and muscle building, and it will keep you young. But when we try to force it by drinking espressos and, doing all this, like, all this extra stuff, are we really just dissing ourselves? Are we not listening to the body? So it's the same thing, whether we're not listening to what the body is telling us or we're not listening to our heart, it
Mm.
is all a sign that we are kind of buried our self-awareness, and that
Yeah.
if we just start to soften that through whatever, people do tai chi, there's so many practices now that you can try to calm your nervous system, but your nervous system remembers. So if you have a response to like a certain person or a certain situation or something you hear on the news, your parts of your body notice this when this happens to you. But like for me, I get an immediate tension in my neck. I
Mm.
started realizing
Mhm.
that, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to work to, when I hear that, take a couple breaths and bring my shoulders down. But it takes that self awareness initially to really uncover I do have the power to not react that way.
Mhm.
And so when you learn these practices and you get more self awareness, that intuition just blossoms, and then, of course, that's where you start to believe that maybe I can change. Maybe I can do less people pleasing, or I can change the work that I'm doing, and I can build new pathways. So I'm not telling you that it never happens, because there are times where I'm like up here before I go, oh, okay, look what happened. I sat at
Mhm.
the computer too long. I do have to get up periodically because I do have some neck issues.
Mhm.
So if we don't listen to that, right? It's chronic pain that can become something really serious if we're not careful. So I
Mhm.
think that really not having intuition is a sign that you really need more alignment in your life,
Mhm.
and those things will fall into place.
Thank you for sharing that. I think listening to your body is so important. And I love how you made the connection of listening to your heart, listening to your body, and listening to your intuition. And doing that and a few other things will kind of get you into alignment, which will ultimately help you function better. So thank you for laying that out and explaining that.
Absolutely. That's really a big passion of mine, to listen to my body. I'm very competitive against myself. When I was 30, I was not healthy physically. And so
Okay.
I've been on a journey spanning decades now where I have been healthy consistently. Now, I'm not saying I don't swing up and down here and there, but overall, I've developed habits because I didn't want to feel that way anymore. I didn't want to
Yeah.
feel stomach issues. I have a history in my family of heart attack and heart disease and high cholesterol. And it makes me feel really good to know that I know how to eat healthy. And
Mhm.
I know that we do not have to age in an unhealthy way. But if you follow what's out there, it's kind of difficult because a
Yeah.
lot of the readily made foods and the habits that we have promote us sitting all kind of
Mhm.
crooked. So sometimes where we're misaligned is that we have a healthy attitude, but we're not treating our body with that same respect. And whether it's over exercise, because that can lead to the same
Yes.
problems of under exercise. So it's really about balance and alignment. And that's why I talk a lot about body, mind, heart alignment, because when those are not aligned, there's going to be some place in your life where you're going to feel it big time. And that's
That's
really
right.
the career that I left, was the stress level, the mental emotional stress level of what was happening. I mean, I was in the schools when that shooting happened in
Mhm.
Vegas, for
Oh,
example,
okay. Yeah.
and I had teachers who were at it and kids who were scared. I mean, when you get 6-year-olds just coming in crying because they're literally watching this on Facebook. We are
Mhm.
traumatizing our kids. When you start to see that's the level of it, and at any time that could happen at your site, it
That's
just
right.
it became like, all of the glory of staying at 30 years became very evident that, you know what, there had to be another way. And so when you go down that road and you're like, okay, I still know how to help people change. I still
Mhm.
really care. And I could put my own spin on it, which,
Right.
some of the stuff that I wanted to do. For example, I used to use breathwork practices with my
Mm.
students who had, whether it was ADHD or some of them on the more violent side, because maybe
Yeah.
what they were seeing at home, it was like, okay, we're going to learn a breath. We're going to write it on
Nice.
a card right above your desk, and it works.
Mhm.
It
It
doesn't matter
does.
what your age. I mean, you see, I think it was in the upper portion of Manhattan where the schools there started doing meditation and their scores went off the charts. So we know that having more mindfulness really does work.
Yes.
And there's some amazing research now that shows if you meditate even 10, 15 minutes a day, and you're in your 50s, for example, they have tested the brain matter, and it as
Yes.
little as 4 weeks, they've shown that you have the same brain matter as a 30-year-old, 25-year-old.
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Okay." So I tell people that
Yeah.
and they go, "Okay, show me how to meditate."
Right. It's very helpful. Very helpful.
The brain is totally
Mhm.
able to change, and I think that we forget that sometimes, and we think we're
Yes.
just kind of stuck with the life that we have right now, but we can change our habits. We really
Mhm.
can.
So true. I agree. If someone with cancer, whether it's a new diagnosis, in treatment, post treatment, or if they're a caregiver, reached out to you today for support, what is the first thing that you would say to them?
I would want them to begin to look at how they are seeing their diagnosis and how they're framing it, because sometimes the way that it's given,
Yeah.
um, is
Mhm.
not necessarily productive. And maybe that doctor is limited and they can only offer that treatment, and that's fine, but I wish they would say it that way. So I'd want the person to kind of check in with that. How are you feeling with your care? How are you feeling with the way that you found this out? Because when my daughter was told something very serious about her spine, well, actually the doctor was telling me in front of her, and she was really too young to hear it, and he did not
Mhm.
ask her to leave the room.
Mm.
So I have been through that where it's like she just was like, and I was like, "Excuse me, could you stop right there?" And then I had my husband take her out of the room. And it's not appropriate when a child is like under 10 years old. And so I feel like we just treat adults like when they're getting a diagnosis like this, like it's X, Y, and Z. Like it's just so simple. I would want them to kind of look at how it was framed for them, and are they comfortable with that those are the options that they have. Because oftentimes, out of fear, we just grasp onto that and then we move forward with it. And I would just encourage them to check in with their heart and see. And if it feels at all like something didn't feel quite good, maybe it was just the delivery. Because, like I was done with that doctor when I saw that delivery, because I was like, this is a third grader. What are you doing?
Right.
We did go to several other doctors. So I would encourage them to do that. And then make sure that when they find someone, that at least, even if they're not a advocate of a certain treatment, that you at least get their opinion of it. Don't
Yes.
just be dismissive. And I think that many times the medical profession, they're so cold about it and they're very like formulaic, like this is what you're going to do. And it's like, let's treat people like they have a bit of a brain themselves and that they
Yes.
have to, like,
Yeah,
come
I
on. I
do.
mean, we have access to all this research now. So, like, I know if it were me, I would be looking like, what are the other options? What are alternatives? Are there any, university hospitals that are doing something different near me? Like, give me some of the options. And if you're just like, boom, like one time my cholesterol came up high when I was first starting out with my diet. The doctor prescribed me a medication without even talking to me. So
Yeah.
it's that type of thing. So I would want them to really check in with that and then assure them that if they were struggling with that, they had every right to
Mm.
have a few other options. And, if they wanted to maybe find an advocate, if they didn't feel comfortable doing research themselves, there, you can certainly find an advocate who can be that go between
Mhm.
you and the doctors. Because honestly, and I know you've been through it, and I don't know what your journey was, but like if you go to a doctor, first of all, have somebody with you. And if you
Yes.
don't, sometimes people are getting that news on their own, especially women that are older. I mean, a lot of us are single. And
Mhm.
so we've got to like mentally prepare for just even a regular doctor appointment because we got to keep it all in order. And
Right.
we've got to get the information that we need without getting emotional. So I'd really want them to check in with like, how is that for you? And are you confident? And if you are, that's wonderful,
Mhm.
but do you need some more support to go through this? And
Yeah.
how can I support you or help you find someone that can be that support for you?
Great answer. I really like how you mentioned encourage the listeners to seek out an advocate. A lot of people don't understand the value of having an independent patient advocate. It's so critical. And that's something else that I do. I'm a patient advocate as well.
Oh,
And
I didn't know that.
yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. And I appreciate you mentioning that because it's still something in a sense that's new,
Mhm.
so they don't really understand, like, how can a patient advocate help me throughout my cancer journey? And it's just like you said, in a nutshell, it's someone who can help to lighten the load, to help you understand the information, be your second set of eyes and ears.
Exactly, and you're not gonna that advocate is going to not have the emotional and the heart in the game, right? They're gonna be
Mhm.
caring or there wouldn't be an advocate, but they're not going to, hear something and get triggered and then not be able to even recall the rest of the
Mhm.
information. I mean, I haven't been very lucky that I've been healthy, but I've had doctors literally tell me, "Oh, I don't have time for another question." I
Oh,
mean, that's
wow.
where we are right now, and I
Mm.
thought, like, when you got to of a certain age that you just were given more time. Apparently not. Maybe
Wow.
it's my insurance or whatever, but I'm not used to hearing that. In my lifetime, when I went to a doctor, it was like whatever you need, and then the next person, like you'd have to wait maybe. But now I can't tell you the number of times in the last couple of years. And again, I'm super healthy for my age. I just want to like get preventative tests and things like that.
Yes.
And they have cut me off. Like I've had to make next appointment, next appointment. So they waste all of our time. They create more appointments. And so there's not a lot of trust, especially in the US, with the medical care that you're going to get. So, yeah, I feel like we could use more medical advocates even outside of cancer because of
Mm.
this. When we were living in Los Angeles, we were able to get an advocate because my daughter has multiple disabilities. Now,
Yes.
to navigate a system like this where they only allow you a certain, like they literally told me you only get to ask for 3 things.
Mm.
And I was like, then I want this reclassified because you cannot do that to somebody who is this young and has potential to be healthy and just keep cutting them off. So we
Oh,
were able to get like an escalated level of care,
good.
but we had to fight for that for 6 months.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I've
Mhm.
served as an advocate for her because she would just get frustrated. Like she periodically gives up on following up on appointments because she
Yeah.
doesn't feel like they get anywhere. So, to me, we need that passion of the advocate who's been through it. It's that same thing. When you've been through it
Mhm.
yourself, you understand how debilitating that experience can be without support. So, I
Yeah.
love that you're doing that. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
you too. It sounds like you're an amazing advocate for your daughter, so great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Denise, I would like to wrap up the conversation. It's been such a pleasure talking with you and learning more about the work that you do as an intuitive coach and intuitive healer. Before we end, what message do you want to leave with the folks listening out there?
I want them to know that no matter what you're going through, you can do this, and it's okay to ask for help. It is okay to ask for help. We are only human, and if you feel overwhelmed, reach out because there's so many people that care and that have been down that road of feeling overwhelmed and feeling like there's no answers. And if you're feeling that way, please, please don't isolate yourself. Reach out to advocates, whether it's a family member or a friend. Let them know that you're struggling because, a lot of times as women, we will suffer in silence and it really does not help us at all. And so I know that there are so many women who have been through difficulties and who would love to be there and to help you. And so if you want to reach out, I am happy to give a free call to give you some advice. And if you're interested in finding out what saboteurs are keeping you from doing that, you can take the free assessment and find out. A lot of times it's going to be some kind of pleaser up there, for us women. Pleaser, the inner judge, those things that kind of like stop us from taking the action that often is the very thing we need. If there's an idea that keeps coming up in your head and you keep saying no to it,
Mhm.
chances are that's where you're out of alignment. You need to go ahead and try that thing that you're thinking of.
Great advice. Thank you for wrapping it up with those wise words. Denise, please tell everyone where they can find you. What's your website?
It is Rock Your Blocks, just as it sounds. And when you get on there, you can subscribe to get some free guidance. And also, there's all my other links are there. But yeah, rockyourblocks.com.
I will have that information in the listen notes as well as a link for people to schedule a free consultation with you if they're interested.
Awesome. That would be
All
great.
right.
Thank you so much, Leah. This was
Y-
great.
You're welcome, Denise. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and wonderful information, very helpful. Hopefully, this conversation will help people address the people pleaser in them. I do have a question for anyone listening to this episode. How did today's conversation resonate with you? Did you find any particular insights or tools that Denise mentioned that may be helpful for you as you navigate your cancer journey? Please feel free to share your experience and reflections. You can share them with me on LinkedIn, search for Talaya Dendy. Also, you can send me an email at nctpodcastfan@gmail.com. Again, that's nctpodcastfan@gmail.com. I would like to give a shout out to the listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. Please share, follow, or subscribe so that you can easily find this podcast and listen again. You can listen on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you or a loved one have been recently diagnosed with cancer and you are just flooded with emotions, please head over to ontheotherside.life/guided meditation and get your free guided meditation today. There's no cost, no commitment. It's yours to have to help you really get things to a place where you can really clear your mind and think. Thank you so much for your time today. That is it for this Wednesday. And until next time, let's keep navigating cancer together. Take care.